Thank you for joining me. I'm Gord Long. A reminder before we begin, do not trade from any of these slides. They're commentary for educational and discussion purposes only. Always consult a professional financial advisor before making any investment decisions. This is the last Under the Lens video for 2023 before we prepare for our 2024 thesis paper. As usual, this is in lieu of the next Under the Lens video in January. The February Under the Lens, as we traditionally do, will focus on the expected macro themes for 2024. I thought it timely to discuss how we have placed ourselves on an economic path of instability. It is a global path which has emerged as a result of poor political policy choices, emerging structural imbalances, and longer-term social cycles. I hope to touch on each of these in the context of how the previous Matasi annual thesis papers has been able to flush out this cancerous emergence. As such, I want to discuss the subjects as outlined and shown here. Let's start by recapping the message I hope this video leaves with you. First, we are currently experiencing the intersection of many long-term financial and social cycles. Whether we're looking at social cycles like the fourth turning by luminaries such as Strauss and Howe, demographic cycles from Harry Dent, or financial cycles by Martin Armstrong, they're all pointing to the era we are presently in. I've never seen this in my lifetime. My research finds this era only comparable to 1849, when global nation-states were forced by the same cycles into a shift from the domination by monarchies to various forms of representative government. Secondly, the political discord and social fracturing of common beliefs, priorities, and values, which binds nations and society, is shifting. We are banding as tribes on the hard right or hard left versus around common hopes and aspirations. Thirdly, COVID-19 has yet to be fully appreciated as the shock it was to the global world order. It acted as a catalyst. 1, destabilizing existing global imbalances. 2, tipped unfundable debt pyramids and broke the hidden financial Ponzi structures. Fourth, it has become clear that we as individuals are increasingly surrendering our freedoms to authoritarian regulatory states for the apparent sake of personal security, resulting in increasing dependency to these entities with the critical loss of human self-reliance. Let's begin this line of thinking with where it starts, and that is with the breakdown of trust and the resulting crisis of confidence in political leadership, justice, and quality. In 2016, the mechanics of our annual thesis process led us to the focus of what we saw as a crisis of trust. In a 200-page paper, we laid bare the core issues that were causing this. The paper is available with the others I will mention on the Matasi.com website, or by having the PDF links and updates for all these thesis papers automatically mailed by simply selecting the free mailing option on our site. We argued that this crisis of trust and cynicism should be expected to result in increasing economic and investment stagnation, and eventually an era of stagflation. In fact, our 2023 thesis paper was entitled A Great Stagflation. My colleague, Charles Hugh Smith, last week published a paper entitled Can We Reverse America's Distemper?, which featured this study on decaying U.S. social trust. The decay is clear and suggests the decay is such that the surveyed individuals feel only 30% of the people they know or come into contact with can actually be trusted. Our research suggests this chart also shows something else. We may not be at a low. In fact, our research suggests things are about to get much worse. We're entering a new era of major distrust, lost confidence, and overall global turmoil. In 2020, our thesis paper mechanics led us to publishing our thesis paper entitled Global Conflict. Here we discuss the elements that would bring a shift from a unipolar world to a multipolar world into increasing conflict. Previously, in 2008, we identified that coming shift in the thesis paper entitled A New World Order. A New World Order, like all the thesis papers shown here, over the last decade have proven themselves over time because the process of abstraction, beginning with the identification of tipping points, the colored boxes shown on the left, has proven to be an excellent research methodology in the increasingly complex global economic and financial matrix. The world's complex network of institutions and governance has evolved as our society and world has evolved. It was never designed, but rather evolved, based on the needs of the time and era. It has become increasingly exposed to the vagrancies of instability because of its almost unknowable level of complexity. It is only effectively stress tested by accident or during a crisis. The 2000 dot-com and the 2008 financial crisis are examples of the system coming under stress, stemming from the hidden complexities in the financial derivatives market, an opaque market now measured in size by an unimaginable quadrillion of notional value. What could possibly go wrong here when it is almost completely unregulated, unreported, and left to the global banks to mysteriously navigate and transact? That is just one of the reasons why interest rates are going up, as associated risk premiums are going up to account somewhat for this unknowable risk. The destabilization and increase of risk premiums elevated substantially with the shockwave of COVID-19. It is easy on a day-to-day basis not to see the big changes that are occurring and the turmoil that is emerging. Though the U.S. GDP is reported to be up 1.6 trillion, the U.S. budget deficit is up 9%, forcing the U.S. to attempt to pull almost the same amount from the global financial markets without blowing the top off global financing rates. The peak-to-trough U.S. 10-year Treasury loss has hit 50%, with unrealized bank losses creating a banking crisis currently being papered over by the Fed's Emergency and Exploding Bank Term Funding Program, or the BTFP. Japan's yen is at a 32-year low, crippling the all-important global Japanese carry trade. The global manufacturer for the world, China, has its renminbi currency trading at a 15-year low. Despite a recent global energy crisis stemming from the EU and the Ukraine, oil markets are suddenly in a bear market, with the West Texas Intermediate crude touching $72 a barrel from well over $100 a barrel. Today, only 7 stocks currently account for more than 30% of the S&P 500 market cap, with technology stocks at 100-year relative highs. Meanwhile, banks are at 80-year lows, and emerging markets are at 50-year relative lows. None of this adds up or makes complete sense. It only makes sense when we start to realize the amount of money that has been pumped into the global economy since COVID-19. In the U.S. alone, we are now spending at a greater level than was required to finance World War II. We have wartime spending in a peacetime economy. How long can that last? And this came after a decade of quantitative easing and zero-bound interest rates, which exploded financial asset values. We thought the dot-com bubble was a lesson we should have learned from, but in fact it appears we have a mirror of it, but at an order of magnitude larger. Total global debt shown here has grown at such a rate that the Financial Times in London last week calculated that the global government interest payments alone would surpass $3 trillion in 2024. This would place many countries in a position of being forced to cut entitlements and critical subsidies, while poorer countries left unable to possibly feed its people. Something should be expected to break somewhere soon. The black channel since the 2008 financial crisis shown here appears to be indicating that the pressures are beginning to take their toll. Stability in markets comes from finding solid financial support levels. Instability comes from overhead resistance levels being unable to be broached. Support levels, because of the degree of run-up we've experienced since the 2008 financial crisis, are minimally much lower. Unfortunately, finding these support levels is going to cause a lot of collateral damage and unintended consequences. We've already entered a period of stagnation, which is quickly moving towards stagflation that will eventually lead to a debt crisis. This is clear to see when we examine the long-term Dow Jones Industrial to Gold ratio. These are two old measures that allow us a glimpse of the larger perspective. We are at a critical pivot that we believe leads to deglobalization in the form of de-risking and reshoring, along with definancialization, and reduced mercantilism in the form of FX reserves not flooding into U.S. treasuries. This is all having a profound impact on a world in turmoil. We can, of course, expect the world to respond. That response will take the necessary form of a return to sound money. The central issue is that fiat currencies are always politically abused and always lead to currency debasement and a debt crisis. That roadmap is well trodden. We are in the upper left part of this established roadmap. The U.S. began coming off sound money in August 1972 when the U.S. came off the gold standard for repaying its debt. As the world's reserve currency, this had global consequences. However, it wasn't until 1980 and the massive issues with U.S. inflation and taking the world's risk-free benchmark in the form of the U.S. 10-year bond to unprecedented levels that the damage was really done and the world was changed forever. Specifically, at that point, the Bank of International Settlements began settling annual accounts in credit and not in gold transfers. This allowed what we call the Great Moderation to come into existence. Falling rates brought globalization, financialization, and consumption to destabilizing levels. Unfortunately, it also created a structurally flawed system of global financial accountability. There was no governor to control the speed of the machine and the amount of credit and debt that could be created. Politicians were effectively unconstrained in the schemes they could contrive for political patronage. The day has arrived, however. The hypothesis of financial instability developed by the economist Hyman Minsky has arrived. Minsky argued that financial crises are endemic in capitalism because periods of economic prosperity encourage borrowers and lenders to be progressively reckless. This excess optimism creates financial bubbles, and the latter busts. Therefore, capitalism is prone to move from periods of financial stability to instability. This type of market failure, therefore, requires government regulations over crony capitalism and, additionally, anti-monopoly enforcement. It has been decades since the Sherman Act has broken up a single corporate monopoly. When the 10 richest people in America all founded and own a dominant corporation with almost total control over their particular facet of this new economy, we know we have arrived. What can we conclude? Hopefully, some of the messages I laid out earlier are a little clearer, or you know where to begin your own research and verification of what I said. In many ways, there is little you can do in changing what lies ahead. That die has been cast. As individuals, however, we need to recognize we are increasingly surrendering our freedoms to authoritarian regulatory states for the apparent sake of personal security. This is resulting in increasing dependencies to these entities, with the critical loss of human self-reliance. The answer to this is to begin a serious focus on our own self-reliance. That starts with stopping being a slave to debt entrapment. Get out of debt or immediately start reducing it. It is going to increasingly cost more to fund that debt. Establish your own circle of dependencies at the local community level, and do not continue your dependency on large entities and centralized governments where your vote is frankly meaningless and fosters little to no change. You must also reassess your value system, particularly related to materialism and consumption. It is another trap the new era will continue to punish ruthlessly. As I always remind you in these videos, remember, politicians and central banks will print the money to solve any and all problems, until such time as no one will take that money or is it of no value or purchasing value. That day is still in the future, so take advantage of the opportunities as they currently exist. Investing is always easier when you know with relative certainty how the powers to be will react. Your chances of success go up dramatically. Powers to be now are effectively trapped by policies of fiat currencies, unsound money, political polarization, and global policy paralysis. I'd like to take a moment as a reminder, do not trade from any of these slides. They're for educational and discussion purposes only. As negative as these comments often are, there has actually seldom been a better time for investing. However, it requires careful analysis and not following what has traditionally been the true and tried approaches. Do your reading and make sure you have a knowledgeable and well-informed professional financial advisor. So until we talk again, may 2023 turn out to be an outstanding investment year for you and your family. I sincerely thank you for listening.